So good morning, everyone, and welcome to this meetup where Jeff Gothelf will walk us through how to use the Lean UX canvas. I'm Tina Øvel, and I'll be your host this morning. And we are very happy to see so many people joining online again today. And of course, we hope that you've had a lovely morning so far. And I think you can feel with me that I'm also quite thrilled that Jeff is joining us today. I'm a huge fan, of course, and also have been working a lot with Agile and Lean UX. So it's going to be very interesting talk, this one. I definitely believe so. Many of you might know Jeff from his award-winning book, Lean UX. And it's actually out in a 3rd edition. So that's definitely something that we'll recommend you go out and look into and see if there's some new things that can be used in your day-to-day work as well. Jeff is a coach, consultant, and keynote speaker, helping companies bridge the gap between business agility, digital transformation, product management, and human-centered design. Jeff and Josh Seiden, that he wrote co-wrote Lean UX with, actually have some new courses online as well. So if you're interested in Lean UX and in general agile product development, then we'll definitely recommend you checking out that site as well. We of course will include all the links and all links to books and so on in the material you receive after this meetup as well. We are also recording the meetup, so you will also receive a recording in the next, I will say, the next week or so. So the agenda for today is that when I'm done with all the practicalities, Jeff will start his talk. You can ask questions in the QA section here in Zoom, and we'll go through them at the end of the session. So yeah, and then for those of you who do not know Preely yet, Preely is a self-service platform for unmoderated remote user testing. It consists of 3 areas where you can create and distribute your test, you can host your own test panel, and you can assess test data and analytics as well. And we collect most common usability and UX metrics. And then we're also having different meetups like these ones. And of course, we would like to hear from you who you would like to hear next. So definitely shoot us a mail if you have some great ideas. And I actually think that was all the practicalities. So Jeff, take it away.
My pleasure. Tina, thanks so much for the kind intro, and thanks for having me, folks. A pleasure to be here. It is morning, so thank you for coming in the morning. And if you've already had a good morning, congratulations. You've been up early and you've been productive, and that's amazing. As Tina said, we're going to talk about a couple of things today. So the overarching theme is Lean UX, right? That's going to be great. We're going to talk about very briefly, I'm going to talk about sort of the origin of Lean UX, because as Tina said, the 3rd edition of the Lean UX book just came out. It literally came out Tuesday. So today's Thursday. It came out Tuesday, 2 days ago. And I want to talk about what's new in the book. Why write a 3rd edition of the book? What's new? What's different? And then we're going to get into very specific detail around the Lean UX canvas, because the book is rewritten, completely reoriented with the Lean UX canvas as the backbone for the book. And we'll talk about what that is and why we did it that way. So I'm going to share a bunch of slides. As Tina said, if you've got questions, please do put them in the Q&A, and we'll get started from there. As always, if you need to find me, I'm at jeffgothelf.com. Super easy. So look, as I mentioned, the 3rd edition of the book came out 2 days ago, which is really exciting. And to talk about Lean UX, I think it's important to talk about why we even ended up here, right? So Josh Seiden and I wrote Lean UX together in 2012. I actually started writing it in 2011. I couldn't finish it. I couldn't get it done in an acceptable way. I needed help. Luckily, I had met Josh Seiden a few years earlier, and I brought him into the project, and together we finished it. And look, the origin story really was we were working. This is late 2000s, early 2010s, early 10s, late aughts, early 10s, as they say, and all of us are trying to build design teams. Josh was trying to build his design team on Wall Street at a trading firm. I'm trying to build my UX design team at a company called The Ladders in New York City. And all of us are starting to wrestle with the suddenly massive adoption of Agile software engineering, right? So late 2000s, the stuff really starts to pick up. And so there's this agile engineering thing, and then there's this UX design thing that we've been doing for a while. And it feels like we're both trying to achieve the same goals. We're both trying to create great products that solve meaningful problems for real customers in an effective way. And yet it seems like every time we got together to make a team, this is how we felt about each other, right? There was always like this big stare down of like UX and engineering, and we couldn't really figure out how to actually build a collaborative process. There was a lot of tension, a lot of staring down, a lot of mistrust. And so what was interesting was there was a third component here that came into play that really helped us bridge the gap of these ideas together. And that was Lean Startup. Now, if you remember 10 years ago, Eric Ries published The Lean Startup. And yeah, it's been 10 years since that book was published. And Lean Startup really helped rethink what product management was. And as we started talking to folks in a variety of different places, both with our teams that we were doing the work with, folks, there was this meetup in New York back in 2009, 10, something like that, called the Agile UX Summit, that brought together product managers and engineers and designers looking to solve this. And one of the people at that meetup was a woman named Janice Frazier. Janice Frazier is an entrepreneur. She is a product manager. She's an investor. She's out in San Francisco. And as we talked about trying to figure out how to put these pieces together, product management, engineering, and design, Janice said, you know, I've been working on this too. And what I call this Lean UX. And all of us looked at each other like, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense, right? That's exactly what we're trying to put together here. And so coming out of the Agile UX Summit, meeting with these smart folks and getting some inspiration, and then taking those ideas and putting them into practice on our teams, in Josh's team on Wall Street, my team at the Ladders, and other folks around the world, we started to figure out how to bridge these things together. And that's really where these ideas of Lean UX came from. Now, over the years, it's taken on a life of its own, right? And I think it's important to when we talk about the origin story, to get into the definition of Lean UX and what it is. And look, it's a design approach, right? It's an approach to doing design that is intended to bring the true nature of a product to light faster, right? So the true nature of a product is the experience of using that product. And how do we bring that to light faster in a collaborative, cross-functional, and user-centered way, right? So we want to collaborate with product management, engineering, design, marketing, QA, whoever, copywriting, et cetera, to build an experience that can give us a sense of whether or not we're actually building something of value, with the goal of the process ultimately being to build shared understanding, right? So that everybody on the team, the cross-functional team, has a shared idea in their head of who the user is, what the user needs, and what our proposed solutions might be. So we've all got a shared vision of that, as well as our definition of success. And this is a big deal, because Lean UX doesn't define success as the delivery of the product. We define success as a change in customer behavior. And so it's really important to get everybody on board with that. And the way that we do that is that we build continuous learning into the product design and development process. So, the nice thing about the way we work today, and why this works well with Agile practices, is because Agile seeks to build continuous software, continuous deployment, right? Continuous integration. And we have these opportunities in these short cycles to ensure that learning takes place in every one of those cycles. And then to use that learning to build evidence for the decisions that we make, right? So the goal is to make evidence-based decisions in a cross-functional team based on whether or not we are improving the user experience for the customer. And our goal is to ensure that every bit of code and design that we put out there actually makes the product or the service better and delivers more value. And that's really the focus of this. And so that's where we started out with this. And so, a good question is, Well, so we wrote the first version. We wrote the first version in between 2011 and 2012. It was published in 2013. The second edition came out in 2016. And why do a third version, right? And so what's interesting is look, things change. As you know, the technology world changes and things move on. Things like, for example, in 2013, this concept of design systems, for example, barely existed in 2013. And since 2013, people have started to adopt Lean UX much more broadly. And so we're getting that feedback from them, and they're telling us how they're working and what they're doing. And so we wanted to update the case studies. We've also been teaching these methods and learning what people want to know, and we've gotten better at explaining what we mean. And as well as we've been using the methods, and we have a new understanding of how to work, so we put that together. And then finally, we've developed new tools over the years. The most important, which is the Lean UX Canvas. We'll get to that in just a second. And in fact, it's become such an important component of how we have these conversations that, as I mentioned before, the whole book has been reorganized around that, and we think it makes the book much more clear that way. And I guess there's one more thing. We just couldn't resist adding a reflection to the cover. Look at this design. I wish I could tell you we had any influence over this, but luckily we did not have any influence over this. Now, let's get into a couple of the bits that are new in the book, and then we'll dive into the canvas. One of the things we dove deep into was much more deeply into this idea of dual track Agile. How do you do product discovery and delivery at the same time? One of the things that Josh and I have done in the last couple of years is we've worked closely with Scrum.org. Scrum.org is one of the training organizations that certifies Scrum Masters, product owners, etc. And we built a class with them called the Professional Scrum with UX. And that was a pretty amazing process for us, because we had never collaborated that closely for such a long period of time with folks who were truly immersed in teaching Scrum, right? We'd worked with Scrum Masters and practitioners, but we worked with two professional Scrum trainers, and we built this class that really takes the ideals of Scrum and the ideals of user-centered design and has put them together in an effective way. And so we talk a lot about how to do discovery and delivery together. So there's a big chunk of the book that's based out of that course, really looking at how these are two different types of work, but they're done by the same team. And the quantity of work that you do of each type of work, whether it's the Lean UX discovery work or the delivery work, is inevitably going to fluctuate from sprint to sprint to sprint based on what you know, what you need to know, and those risks. Other things we cover more specifically about this is how to write stories and how to manage your backlog as well when it comes to blending discovery and delivery stories, right? Do we want to do two separate backlogs? We don't, right? Do we want to do one backlog with separate UX stories and discovery stories and delivery stories? It's a good start. And then ultimately, we're looking to build these kind of blended stories where we're really focusing on a feature or a value, a unit of value being delivered rather than a design or a feature or that type of thing. And so there's a lot of detail in the book about how to write those types of stories and really focus on where UX fits in the process, right? So if we've got Scrum and UX together, where do these pieces fit together in the process? And in fact, this diagram is in the book, and this diagram comes right from the course. One of the exercises that we do when we teach the course is we actually put up the Scrum diagram. That's that thing in the middle there. That's the standard Scrum.org framework diagram. And we get everybody to generate a bunch of Post-it notes that talk about the different UX activities, UX design, research, right? All that kind of stuff. And then we say, okay, great. Map those Post-it notes to where you think they fit into the Scrum framework. And it's a really interesting conversation. We do it once at the beginning of class, and there's a lot of heated debate. And then we talk about how to bring these processes together. And then we do it again, and we see what people change from that. And we end up with situations that look a bit like this. And a lot of that learning is in the book as well. And it's something to focus on a lot. The other thing that's become very popular in the last few years that we didn't want to ignore in the third edition of the book was OKRs, objectives and key results. And there's an explicit reason why we believe OKRs have a place in the Lean UX book. Now, if you're not familiar with objectives and key results, or you're trying them and you're not figuring them out, the short of it is, right, is that if you're writing a good it's a goal setting framework. It's been around for 40 years, but it's finally kind of having its day in the sun, with the goal of resetting the way that we measure success away from did we deliver a feature to did we change customer behavior, right? Key results, if written correctly, are outcomes. They're measures of customer behavior, right? We increased retention by 50%. We increased average order value, things like that. Those should be your key results. If you write a good OKR statement, there are no features in there. And so if OKRs are used correctly, if they're written correctly and applied correctly, they explicitly demand that teams do discovery work. Discovery work is Lean UX work to figure out which combination of code, copy, design, value proposition, pricing model, business model, et cetera, is going to achieve the kind of behavior change that we want to see in our target audience. And so that's why we couldn't ignore OKRs in this book, not only because we think they're very important, and we have fairly strong opinions about them in the book, but because if you frame the work for the team with OKRs, then the team has to do discovery work. They have to practice Lean UX. And that's really, really important. And that's why that's in the book as well. And obviously, if you're doing discovery work, you're going to build empathy and customer centricity into your ways of working, because you're going to go out, you're going to test your ideas, you're going to talk to your customers, you're going to learn what's working, what's not working, where the real problems are. And you're going to come back with a deeper understanding of the people that you're serving. And then finally, again, so there's so much goodness that comes out of doing this correctly, right? So if we're setting goals as key results, and we're practicing discovery work, and we're building a better understanding of the customer, then inevitably, we are going to increase the agility of our organization. Why? Well, if you boil down agility to its core concept, you can read a million books in the Agile Manifesto and all those things. But the bottom line, organizational agility is the ability to change course based on newly discovered evidence. That's it, right? If you work in a company or in a team that changes its priorities based on evidence and learning, you're being agile, right? That's agility. And so if we're doing discovery work and we're building empathy for the customer, and we're discovering that the things that we're working on are not the best way to serve the customer, to solve their problem, to positively impact their behavior, to achieve the key result, then we change course, right? And that is agility. That's organizational agility. And so we cover a lot of that in the book as well, because it's sort of like Lean UX is like the middle bit of that sandwich, sort of OKRs like the top half of the sandwich. They lead into Lean UX work. And then the bottom half is this organizational agility. It's the benefit that comes from doing the discovery work. And so we talk a lot about that in the book as well, and very, very important. And look, and then as I mentioned, and we're going to get into things a little bit more in detail now, the book is reorganized around the Lean UX canvas. Now, the Lean UX canvas came about because if you've read Lean UX version 1 or Lean UX version 2, you will recognize that there are a series of exercises in those versions of the book that allow you, that ask you to declare your assumptions, right? And they were kind of scattered throughout the book. And as we began teaching the material in a very specific way, it became clear to us that we could explain these exercises in a standardized one sheet, kind of one piece of paper way of approaching. And look, canvases have become very, very popular, right? Courtesy of our friend Alex Osterwalder over in Switzerland. He gave us the business model canvas. I think that was sort of the first canvas that became widely used. And then we've seen lots of other folks prepare canvases. I do a lot of work with my friend Jeff Patton he had a canvas that he still uses called the opportunity canvas. And so we started playing with these models and adapting them to bring together all of these assumptions declaration exercises into one tool. And this tool became the Lean UX Canvas, and it works for existing systems as well as new products and new ideas. The main difference from business model canvas and perhaps even the opportunity canvas is that we've removed focus from revenue streams and channel partners, right? So if you look at the business model canvas, it has boxes for channel partners and revenue streams and things like that. We actually removed that because I think the business model canvas sits a bit higher in sort of the conversation. It's a strategic business level or business unit level conversation, whereas the Lean UX canvas is a bit more tactical than that. And the goal is to help you very explicitly facilitate a series of divergent and convergent brainstorming exercises to extract the team's assumptions out of their heads. So if we're working with product design and engineering, even if it's people that we've worked with together for a very long time, we're going to make the assumption that they all think the same thing. And the reality is that they don't, right? Even with things like who's the customer. And so the Lean UX Canvas, the exercises in it are designed to get those ideas out of people's heads quickly so that we can build that shared understanding and decide how to move forward very, very quickly, right? And to build that collaboration. And again, look, it's a facilitation tool to help you have the right conversation. It's not designed to be a checklist. Like, did we do box 1? Did we do box 2? Did we do box 3? In other words, once you get fairly comfortable with the tool and with a level of maturity, there are going to be plenty of situations where you might say, let's just go back and do box 5 again. Let's revisit box 6. We don't have to do 1 through 5 again. And so you'll pick that up with maturity. Now look, why even go through the trouble of declaring these assumptions, right? It's very important that we recognize and come to terms with the fact that our best ideas, all of our ideas about what to build, how to serve the customer, what to ship into market, they are assumptions. They are our best guesses about how we're going to help our users and how we're going to become successful in the marketplace. Now, for the last forever, right? Like 100 years, really, right? The measure of success for most companies has been, did you ship a product to market, right? Because that comes from manufacturing. We think about this factory mindset, right? We want to make more stuff. If we make more stuff, we are delivering value. Now, look, that makes sense if you're making physical products, right? If you're making Sharpies or markers, right? If we sell 1 Sharpie, that's terrific. If we sell 1 million of these, that's great. But when you take that same concept of, hey, let's make more stuff because it delivers more value, we end up with products that look like this, right? This is a ridiculous product, right? Because the overwhelming majority of people who want to play guitar probably just want to use 1 of those necks in there, right? But the other 5 necks get in the way of you using that 1 neck, right? This is a metaphor for so many of the products and services that we have today, right? Think about this as like the Microsoft Word version of a guitar, right? All I want to do is just type up a document, but there's an infinite number of features just getting in the way of me typing that document, right? And this is the result of generating output, right? We keep generating all these features and all this output because we can, and because we assume that that's what is going to deliver value to the customer, right? But the reality is, if we don't validate that each one of these features delivers value, then we end up with these bloated products. We end up with these systems that are difficult to use, difficult to maintain, and are ripe for disruption, frankly. And as we all know today, disruption is permanent in all of our industries. The barriers to entry are super low, right? If you and I want to start a bank tomorrow, you and I can start a bank tomorrow. That was impossible 20 years ago, right? But we can build banks like Revolut and N26 and so forth today because the barriers to entry are so low. And so if we're building big, convoluted bloated products and people can't use them, they're going to leave for the simpler products, right? So so how does the Lean UX Canvas help us avoid building these products? Well, it's designed, again, to help us think through what value actually is, right, for the customer, and then how do we make sure that we are actually delivering value. So look, the Canvas is designed explicitly to kind of help you walk through a narrative. So the left side of the Canvas, boxes 1 and 3, focus on the current state of things. So box number 1 is the business problem we're trying to solve, right? What's the challenge that we're taking on? What is the thing that the organization would like to fix today? And box number 3 is the current state of our users. Who are they? What are they trying to do? What's getting in their way? And so that's our current state, right? That's what's happening today. The other side of the Canvas is the future. It's what we're trying to achieve later, or if you're familiar with the Toyota Kata people call this the target condition, right? What are we trying to achieve in the future? And that's in box number 2. It's the business outcomes. So what are the behavior changes that we see in our customers that tell us that we have solved the problem? And box number 4 is the user outcomes. What are the users getting? What are the benefits that they get if we solve the problem for them? And our goal is to get from the current condition, from now, right, to later. That's the kind of narrative that we're trying to have. Now, the bridge between now and later is in box number 5. This is where we brainstorm solutions, features, products, services, initiatives, whatever it is, right? Campaigns that we believe are going to help us get from the current condition to the target condition. That's absolutely, and if you think about it, you know, a lot of the design, kind of traditional design work that you think about happens in box number 5, right? There's obviously design is a much bigger umbrella, but for the folks in your organization who think design is actually like making designs, like actual, this is a lot of that happens in box number 5. Now, as I've said a few times now, everything in boxes 1 through 5 is are assumptions. Everything in there is an assumption, right? It's your best guess about the business problem, the customer, the outcomes, et cetera, and the systems that you might build to serve them. And so the bottom third of the canvas is designed to help us test if we're right, okay? And so what we're doing here with these exercises is we are working through a series of assumptions in boxes 1, 2, 3, and 4 that constrain the space for the brainstorm of solutions, right? So we talk about the problem that we're solving. We're talking about the behavior change we'd like to see if we solve it. We're talking about the specific customer segment that we're going after and the benefits that we want to see for them. And what we've done here is we've greatly constrained the space for the brainstorm for features and solutions so that whatever we come up with in box number 5, at the very least, we believe is going to serve our customers and solve our business problem, right? And so we've declared all of these assumptions. And now with the bottom third, we are going to test those ideas. And if the ideas that we have achieve the behavior change that we talked about in box number 2, right, then we've delivered value, right? And if those ideas do not change the behavior in the way that we have described in box number 2 as a business outcome, then we have to either kill the idea, right, pivot on the idea, right, maintain the strategy or change the tactics, or decide to persevere because we believe that we might actually be able to push this thing through. But we're going to adjust our course. We're going to be agile based on the learnings that we get from that bottom third, right? That's where sort of the experimentation piece comes into play. So that's how this was designed. And again, the book is completely organized around this particular workflow. I want to show you an example or two of a canvas, what it looks like completed, and give you a sense of how we think about sort of walking through this. Now, this first example I'm going to share with you is a bit meta because it's about It's about my business, right? I actually wrote this about the work that I do and the way that I sell my work. So the problem that I'm trying to solve for myself, and I apologize, I have to read it on this screen over here, it's just a little bit bigger, right? Product discovery is seen primarily as a digital product practice, right? With pressure mounting to get to market faster, there's an increasing demand for applying these techniques to physical products, actual physical products. However, little content exists in this domain, reducing target market for training, workshops, and coaching. So what the business problem I'm trying to solve is I teach this to digital product teams, but there are physical product teams, industrial manufacturing teams who could benefit from this, but we don't have a lot of content for them. So how might we, in this case, me, improve product discovery content in a way that is relevant to physical companies, as measured by an increase in the number of organizations asking for this training? That's the behavior change I'm looking for. And the number of public case studies generated by these organizations. So the measures, the high level measures of success is that I'm getting inbound inquiries from physical manufacturing and industrial manufacturing companies, and they're writing case studies about this. That's the problem I'm trying to solve. Now you'll notice that there's nothing in here that talks about how I'm going to solve this. We have to do discovery, right? If I solve this, how will behavior change? Here's 3 different ways behavior could change, right? The number of workshops or engagements that I sell into this industry is a good indication that I'm making progress at solving this problem, right? The number of referrals to this specific workshop from others in this domain. So let's say I work with, I don't know, General Electric, right? On their, in their aviation department. So they make motors for airplanes, right? Maybe somebody at General Electric Aviation recommends me to somebody at Rolls-Royce Aviation, something like that, right? That becomes an interesting idea. And then the number of case studies published from this domain that reference the workshop as an inspiration, right? So I want to see these folks love these ideas so much that they're writing case studies. They're saying, we took this Lean UX class and you know what? It changed the way that we build airplane engines, something along those lines. But that tells me that we've done something positive, right? And as we start to think about, okay, great, well, who would we target with this content? And there's 2 different types of people. I won't get into all the details here, but like there's sort of the buyer persona for me, which is my C-level executive, CPO, CMO. And then of course, there's more of the target, the people who would actually attend the training, the product managers and the product engineers at these companies and why they would need that. And then I started thinking, okay, well, what benefits would they get from this? What makes them, why would they even seek out this kind of training? And so they've, you know, again, this is where we get into sort of the empathy part of the conversation. And so for example, these folks feel like they're doing the best work of their career. They're saving the company money and helping it win. And they learn something new that they can apply daily at work to do a better job and get ahead in their career, right? So these are the kind of benefits that they get if we do a good job with this training. So as you've noticed, hopefully, I've created the current condition, right? The current condition is I don't sell stuff to physical manufacturing companies. And these are the people who currently work in that space. And the outcome is I want to see more people buying from that domain and writing case studies. And hopefully what happens is they get better at their jobs, they save their company money, they feel they're more successful. So how do we get from now to later? Lots of ways to do that, right? Just 3 ways that I thought of here, right? I could customize an on-site workshop for hardware and industrial domains. I could provide coaching, right? To help these ideas stick in these domains. And I could work on executive training and coaching to ensure that the environment in these industrial companies supports these new ways of working and approaching this. Right? These are just some ideas. Are they good ideas? Are they bad ideas? I don't know. But then we start to put together the bottom third, right? How do I test these ideas? And the first thing that we do is we start to write some hypotheses around this. So for example, here's a hypothesis statement, and all these templates, right, are available on my blog and in the book. We believe 3 industrial hardware workshops will be sold this year if Lori, the CMO, believes her teams are learning ways to work faster, smarter, cheaper with a 2-day product discovery workshop for industrial manufacturing, right? That's my hypothesis, right? Or I believe 3 case studies for this domain will be written this year if Greg, the product lead, can help build the hiring brand of his company with a mail me an outline and I'll write the case study for you feature, right? So the service is, I'll do the writing, you just send me the outline, you approve it, and we publish it together to make it easier for them to do it. Is that a good idea? Is that a bad idea? I don't know, but we have to test it, right? And so in box number 7 in the canvas, we start to talk about the risks to our hypotheses. What are the biggest risks? What are the most important things we need to learn right now about our hypotheses? And so, for example, one of the biggest risks that we come across in this particular case is, can we find enough material and ideas to apply Lean UX to industrial manufacturing? Right? That's a risk. I don't know if it exists. And so we need to go looking for it. Right. And so then box number 8 is where we start to design our experiments, right? The question then becomes, what's the least amount of work we need to do to learn the next most important thing? The thing in box number 7, how do we learn that the fastest way? And the answer to this question is your experiment, or what Eric Ries called in the Lean Startup, your MVP, right? It's how we test the idea. And our goal here is to do the least amount of work possible, right? Not because we're lazy, but because the less work that we do, the less we invest in this idea. And if the experiments that we run invalidate our hypothesis, it's a lot easier to change course, to be agile, if we've invested less in the idea. It hurts less, right? If you spend 6 months on an idea and find out that it's wrong, that's going to hurt a lot. You're going to be reluctant to change course. If you spend 6 days on it, or even 6 hours on it, it's a lot easier to change course, to let an idea go and move on to the next one. So some ways that I can test my risk here: I can do Google searches, Lean UX in industrial manufacturing, product discovery in industrial manufacturing, prototyping in right? It's one way to do it. Super easy, right? Sounds trivial. It's not, right? Twitter queries. I have 45,000 Twitter followers. Right? I can ask them, hey, does anybody work in industrial manufacturing? And are you doing any kind of product discovery work? Right? Please retweet for reach and see what comes back. And if you think that's trivial, it's not. It generates really fantastic results. I've done this multiple times, and you start to meet people who are more than willing to share their expertise. Here's another slightly bigger effort, right? To do this, I could do a LinkedIn ad campaign targeting my personas in this industry to learn more about this type of training, right? So if you've ever done any advertising on LinkedIn, you can target very, very, very explicitly who you want. So I could look for chief product officers and chief marketing officers at industrial manufacturing companies of a certain size. And I can say, hey, do you need help discovering product? Have you done product discovery? And just seeing who clicks through to my landing page, collect some survey results, and then decide what to do with that effort. Now, again, this is just a sample, right? This is just a little brainstorm that I did to help me with my business. But my goal is to understand the problem that I'm dealing with, the goal that I'd like to achieve, a variety of ways for me to get there, and then lightweight ways for me to test those ideas, right? And if I get feedback that those ideas have merit and have weight, then we can move forward and invest a bit more in the idea. Now, I've got a couple more concepts to share with you, and then we'll do Q&A. So maybe 5 more minutes. If you've got any questions, do put them in the Q&A chat. Now, look, here's the thing. You're going to generate a lot of hypotheses. I just showed you an example canvas. It only had 2 or 3 hypotheses in it. When you're doing this for real with your teams, you're going to generate a big stack of hypotheses. That's just how it is. The reality is you can't test everything, and you shouldn't test everything, right? Most of us don't work with just a learning budget or a discovery budget. We actually have to ship product to market. And so as a tool to help with the Lean UX canvas, we also put together a hypothesis prioritization canvas, which is nothing but a fancy 2x2 matrix, right? I'll admit it, it's just a 2x2, right? With the x-axis being risk and the y-axis being perceived value. Now, the reason why it's perceived value is because we don't know if our idea is valuable. We believe it's valuable, but we don't know. And what we want to do is we want to take our hypotheses and map them on this 2x2 based on how risky we believe it is and how valuable we believe it is, right? And so if you take my 2 hypotheses that we wrote about before, right, I map those 2, and I believe that these are highly risky, but also highly valuable, right? So they're risky because, well, I don't, building these workshops and nobody buys them is a lot of risk for me. And if a company publishes a, it's two the same one. Did I put the same one in there twice? Anyway, if they publish a case study, it might go all wrong. Now, the idea, if a hypothesis lands in the top right-hand corner where it's high risk and high value, our goal is not to let it sit there too long, right? Our goal is to start to test those hypotheses and hopefully reduce the risk on some of them so we can shift them over to box number 2. In box 2, we've reduced the risk on the hypothesis. We still believe that it's valuable. So at this point, we're going to build it, we're going to ship it, and we're going to measure it. We're going to make sure that it lives up to our expectations, but we've tested it enough to warrant investing in it and building a full software solution to it. Now, we might find out that some of our hypotheses aren't valid, right? That they're false. They fall below the line and we reduce their value. At this point, we're going to throw those hypotheses away. And so we want to work very, very quickly to get the hypotheses out of box number 1, the ones that we're actually going to test, and either move them to box number 2 or below the line, right? The ones that we test, anything that lands in box number 1, we test, and our goal is ultimately to clear all of that out. Now, last thing I want to talk about, and then we'll do Q&A, is this. We're talking a lot about experimentation in Lean UX and in product discovery, right? We've identified our assumptions, we've written our hypotheses, and we're starting to design our experiments. One of the things we want to think through when we design our experiments is how much do we know about our hypothesis? How confident are we? How much evidence do we have about our hypothesis? Now, if we know very little about our hypothesis, it's a brand new idea, it's a thing we just came up with, we're kind of over here on the left in the land of wishful thinking. We like this idea, but we have no idea if it's valid. And so in this particular case, we are going to spend as little as possible on our experiment to learn something, to collect some evidence about this particular hypothesis. As we collect more evidence, we go to those 2 questions in boxes 7 and 8 again. What's the next most important thing we need to learn? And what's the least amount of work that we need to do to learn it? But now we have more evidence. And because we have more evidence, we can now spend a bit more effort. We can invest a bit more in our experiment. So maybe we started off with customer conversation and paper prototypes because they're cheap and they're easy. And they worked out pretty well. We got some good feedback. So now we're going to build some kind of a prototype. Or maybe we build a Wizard of Oz MVP, right? And as we collect more evidence, we justify greater investment in our experiments. So we want to follow that green curve, right, when it comes to how much time and effort we're spending on our experiments. At some point in the process, the only way to learn the next most important thing will be to write software, to write code. But rarely is it the first thing that we should do. And if at any point along this process, we start to get negative feedback, just because we got some positive feedback with our customer conversations and paper tests, as we start to build prototypes, if we start to get negative feedback, we don't just blindly continue investing more. We have to start to have that conversation, the kill, pivot, persevere conversation. Now, look, most of the companies that I work with spend a lot of time below this green curve. And it's, I use the word stupid in here, but stupid really means unnecessarily risky, right? Because you do not have the evidence to justify the investment in these ideas, right? And remember, the more you invest, the more difficult it is to change course. So if you collect evidence that says, oh crap, this is a bad idea, it's not going to work, but you just built some software, the organization is going to hesitate at throwing that code away, right? So we want to follow that green curve and really start to think about it again, kind of more in these kind of lean startup terms, right? At the beginning of the curve, we're just looking for product solution fit. Can we find something that actually solves the problem, right? And then if we can, right, we're looking for product market fit. Can we actually expand it and build a business around it? Again, the questions that we're asking here change over time, right? And so as we work through the Lean UX canvas, the early ideas, the early things that we're working on, we start answering these questions. Should we build it, right? The experimentation that we're doing as we're practicing Lean UX is, should we actually be working on this? And if the answer to that is yes, then great. Does this support the business? Can we build a business around it? Can we scale it? Will it help us make money and grow and succeed a bit more? And all of these tools are part of the Lean UX canvas. All of them are part of the new book, and all of them are part of this growing Lean UX conversation, which I'm humbled and flattered and thrilled to say is getting richer and more robust in, over the 10 plus years that we've been doing this work. And so with that, I'd love to take your questions. I just want to say a quick thank you and show you a funny photo of Josh and I somewhere in the world. If you have any questions about the book, this is probably in Scandinavia. Josh and I have traveled all over the world and together talking about Lean UX. But if you have any questions, obviously, for me or for Josh, just drop us an email or tweet, and we'd love to hear from you. Okay. And so with that, thanks so much for listening. And I'd love to know what's on your mind.
Oh, thank you so much for a very interesting talk, Jeff.
My pleasure.
I would actually like to start the ball with a question. So I'm working very much with UX and business as we speak. So, and you touch upon it, you have the business model canvas, of course, and it's more high level. And then you go into being more operational when we talk about the Lean UX canvas. Yeah. But can you see a bridge between those two? Or is the bridge actually the business problem in the Lean UX canvas?
I think that's a really good question. So I think the way that I've seen it used, if you ask me, I think you can use Lean UX Canvas for anything. But look, the reality is they're better. You don't have to hit everything with the same hammer, right? I mean, we've got different tools. They're all free, so there's no cost. I think the business model canvas is a terrific exercise for organizations looking to launch a new business unit, a new product, a new service, or a startup, a founder really trying to think through all of the various possibilities for launching their business. I think that once you start to head down that particular path and you start to collect some data about that business unit, that new product, that new service, that new startup, you start to identify, hopefully, you start to identify customer problems, business problems, things that are getting in the way of you being successful. And I think that to your point, I think that that's where the Lean UX canvas comes in, is you can say, look, we launched this particular business unit to solve this need. It's no longer doing that. And so we really need to think more tactically about how to fix that. And so I think you're right. I think the business problem statement is a good bridge between those two. And ideally, you're working with some kind of data at that point. It doesn't have to be overwhelmingly statistically significant data. It could be qualitative data, right? But you've put something into market, you've got some feedback, and now you're trying to more tactically figure out how to fix the deployment of that thing.
Yeah, great. So Daisy is asking, how do you introduce, encourage, promote, and uphold a Lean UX method approach in a company that is new to UX design and its methods?
Well, that's a great question. It's honestly, and I know it happens. But it's really difficult for me to believe that organizations are still new to UX, right? Like 40 years of work, you figure that at some point. But I know it happens. It's just still surprises me. But that said, look, if an organization is investing in user experience design, that's a great signal, right? It's a signal that the organization has recognized that there's a problem to be fixed and that this particular skill set and discipline can help fix it. So you're already in a good position because the organization is hiring people and investing in it. I think Lean UX is a terrific way to introduce the organization to great user experience and design practices in a way that doesn't overwhelm the organization. What I've seen happen before is an organization will hire a UX team, and the UX team will start to make really big demands immediately. We have to change everything. We have to stop this. We have to completely reorganize the process. And that's fails. It fails because organizations fear change. You don't have the credibility as a new discipline or a new practitioner in an organization to demand such big changes. And so what I like about Lean UX is a way to introduce UX in general. And again, the umbrella term, design, research, prototyping, copywriting, content strategy, IA. And if I forgot your discipline, I'm sorry. There's just a lot of stuff in there. But is to introduce smaller exercises. Hey, let's just do a solutions brainstorm together, right? Or hey, let's just do proto personas, right? That's an hour-long exercise. Let's take your designer, your engineers, your product manager, sit in a room for an hour, and let's sketch some proto personas. Who are we building the product for, right? Ideally, you set that up, and look, and you've got a dual opportunity here, right? You've got an opportunity to introduce the exercise and a slice of UX, right? And the other opportunity is you have to establish yourself as the facilitator for these types of activities, which means that if you're the facilitator, you get invited to every meeting, right? And that's a good thing, by the way, when you're new, when the practice is new and you're starting to introduce people to new ways of working. If you, Daisy, are the facilitator for this UX stuff, well, we got to get Daisy in this meeting and facilitate the UX stuff. And so what you're doing is you're introducing a new concept. You're introducing it in a very lightweight way. You're creating an opportunity for you to showcase your facilitation skills and the benefit of you being in that meeting. And if it goes well, you've got a small win. And that small win is evidence that you can use to then justify a slightly bigger ask the next time, right? Hey, you remember that proto persona exercise we did last week? That was pretty cool, right? You guys felt like we learned a lot, made some good decisions, terrific. Let's do, we're gonna do a design charrettes next time, a design studio exercise, or terrific. That's going to take a half day. So I need you guys for a half day. Okay, great. I'll facilitate. I'll get it ready. I'll tell you what to do. That type of thing, right? And so Lean UX is great for that because all those boxes on that canvas are little tiny exercises that you can just do one of and introduce, and then use that small win to build and grow and increase validity and credibility for not only yourself, but UX as a practice and the benefits that it can bring to the organization.
Yeah, I think that's a good answer. And we actually have a new question from Christian, and I think that goes a bit hand in hand with what you've been saying here. But he asked, how do you see the link between the UX canvas and design thinking tool, such as design sprints, for instance?
Yeah, good question. So the interesting thing is that right before the pandemic, I managed to get Jake Knapp here to Barcelona. And he and I taught a workshop together during the day, a one-day workshop where we did Lean UX and design sprints. And he and I worked hard on figuring out an answer to that question. So I have an answer for you that is Jake Knapp approved because
that's great.
Which is great. I've got like the Jake stamp of approval. And basically the way that it works is if you can get through boxes 1 through 6 in the canvas to get to a point where you've got a series of hypotheses, those hypotheses fit really nicely, feed really nicely into the design sprint work, right? So the hypotheses serve as the input into the design sprint, so that ideally you're coming out of the design sprint with some validated hypotheses and a backlog of work you can start doing. And that's how we kind of reconciled it. Okay,
awesome. Shin is asking, can the key results from the OKRs be used in business outcomes and user benefits, or how does OKRs fit into the canvas?
This is a great question. It's come up a couple of times in the last 2 weeks, and so it's my next blog post. So, but I'll give you the answer right now. So, and I'm glad this question comes up a lot. Box number 2 in the Lean UX canvas is business outcomes. Those are key results. So to be just super explicit, and maybe we'll do a V3 of the canvas at some point to update that. But Business outcomes are changes in customer and user behavior. Key results are changes in customer and user behavior. Same thing. Okay, so those are your key results. You can extract the objective statement from the how might we statement portion. Sorry, you can get the objective out of the how might we portion of the business problem statement. So, for example, you might say, how might we improve the system so that users are more successful in applying for mortgages in a shorter amount of time, right? Say you work for a bank. And so your objective might be to become the easiest and fastest mortgage application in Denmark, right? That's your objective. And your key results could be reduce the time to completion by 50%, increase completion rates by 99%, something else, right? So you can get the objective out of the second half of the problem statement and the key results out of box number 2, which are your business outcomes.
Okay, then we have a question. Do you recommend prioritizing hypotheses only or not the specific ideas/solutions in the value risk matrix?
So to me, the solutions are in the hypothesis, right? So we didn't cover the hypothesis template here, but generally speaking, the hypothesis template is, we believe that we can achieve an outcome, a change in behavior, if these users, the personas, get some kind of a benefit with this feature or solution. So the solution is in there. It's in the hypothesis statement. And so we prioritize the hypotheses, but essentially we're prioritizing the solutions in that sense. So to me, it's the same thing. The reason why I didn't get into this because just time, frankly, the reason why we ask you to write the hypothesis statement is because the hypothesis, writing it is the first test of your idea. Basically, a hypothesis is a user story, with the acceptance criteria being outcomes or key results rather than works as designed. The story that you're writing in a hypothesis has to be believable. It has to be compelling. You have to believe it, and others have to believe it. And so if you can't write a hypothesis statement for a solution in a way that you believe and that your team believes, you're never going to convince anybody else that it's a good idea. And so we ask you to go through box number 6 to write those hypotheses, because it'll kick out some features that were fun to think about but don't make any sense as a whole. And then, okay, now then let's prioritize them on the canvas itself. So it's the same thing, but there's a filter when you write the hypothesis statement that kicks out some solutions that you maybe shouldn't be working on.
Okay, yeah. Then in another lane, Martha is asking, in your canvas, you have both users and customers, but in your presentation, you often mention customers. What do you see as the difference of users and customers?
I mean, look, it's the endless debate, right? Of what should we call the people who consume our products and services. Sometimes they're customers, sometimes they're users, sometimes they're both, right? Not every time the people who choose the product actually use the product, like B2B situations, right? Like nobody chooses Workday, nobody chooses to use, like the users, nobody chooses to use SAP. Somebody, and the choosers of SAP never have to use it, right? And so, it's just the people who consume the thing that you make, right? So consumers, if that's a better phrase for you, it's an infinite debate, and I do my best to avoid these sort of endless debates, but say it's the humans who consume the thing that you make.
Yeah, okay. Then we have a question. If you can't implement the whole framework, what is the least we could do to increase the value?
Great question. It's a pretty lightweight framework, but right. But if you had to reduce it even further, I would say you can't skip box number 1. Because box number 1 forces you to change the conversation from let's implement a solution to let's solve a problem. So if the framing for the work is let's implement a solution, the bandwidth for this discovery shrinks to almost nothing, right? So if somebody comes to your boss, your stakeholder, client, and they say, build me the mobile app, make it blue and ship it by Friday, right? Not a whole lot of room for discovery there. You could discover which shade of blue, right? But generally speaking, you've got to get a mobile app that's blue by Friday, right? If you can reframe that conversation in box number one that says, listen, we are not seeing the level of sales that we expected through the mobile channel. And because that is a less expensive channel for us, we would like to increase the amount of revenue, the amount of sales that we drive through that channel. Can you help us solve that problem, right? All of a sudden, you don't know what you're going to build. You don't know how to solve that problem. You have to go do discovery work, right? So you cannot skip box number one because that frames the work in a way that, which is the problem statement, right? That frames the work in such a way that forces you to do discovery work. So I would say you can't skip box number one. If you've done this before, you could skip to box 6. I hate to advise this because I don't think you should, but if I had to boil it down to like the ones I would absolutely not, I would say you could jump to box 6 and try to write hypotheses. If you've done it before, you could probably get there pretty quickly, and then really the conversations in boxes 7 and 8 are pretty critical. So I'd say 1, 6, 7, and 8. If you had to, so in case you don't know what 1, 6, 7, 8, business problem statement, hypotheses, risks, and experiments to me would be the critical ones, but still it's pretty lightweight even with all 8.
Exactly. Okay, Christopher is saying, great presentation. Any tips on how to convince management to prioritize Lean UX as part of the corporate strategy?
So yeah, look, I mean, at a high level, right? And strategy is an interesting conversation, right? Because it all depends on how strategy is presented to you, right? Strategy, if an organization understands strategy, they understand that strategy is a hypothesis. And that strategy doesn't come with a series of explicit solutions. It comes with direction for the company. For example, strategically, we would like to expand into Southern Europe in 2022. Right, that's the strategy for 2022 is Southern expansion, right? Or we'd like to move into the mobile gaming market in 2022 strategically, or we'd like to expand our e-commerce business in that's strategy, right? If strategy is presented to you as a hypothesis, which strategy is a hypothesis, right? Your bosses don't know for sure. They can't predict the future, just like you can't predict the future, right? If strategy is presented as a hypothesis, that hypothesis comes with some sort of KPIs, right? KPIs are going to be and generally speaking, they're going to be, revenue, retention, profit, sales, customer satisfaction, right? Those are the kinds of KPIs. Those are the metrics that we see that help us measure whether or not we're achieving the strategy. If the strategy work is presented to you that way, Lean UX is a natural next step, right? Product discovery is the next step. We'd like to move into the mobile gaming market, and we're hoping to see, currently we generate, almost no revenue. We'd like to see 1,000% increase in revenue from mobile gaming in the next year, right? Terrific, right? Let's go discover how to achieve that, right? So Lean UX says, look, there's a budget allocated to achieving this strategy. I'm sure of it, right? We're in the throes of planning season right now, right? And so budgets are being assigned. You say, boss, listen, strategy is this, your KPIs are that. There's €1 million allocated to this. We'd like to spend 10% of that to do some discovery work so that we can deploy 90% of it on the thing most likely to help us hit the strategy goals, to achieve the strategy next year. That's a great conversation to have, right? I think that to me is a terrific way to do that. If strategy isn't presented to you in that way, which is more likely, right? more likely strategies presented as build this feature next quarter, right? In that situation, the conversation you want to have the conversation, why? Right? But you want to have that conversation in a way that doesn't threaten your career at that company, right? And so the question is really, it's like, okay, so some key questions that you can ask is, especially if your boss comes to you and says, build me that mobile app by the end of the quarter and make it blue. And you say, great, boss, you got it. Blue mobile app coming up, end of Q4. If we do a great job, and I know we'll do a great job, what will our customers be doing differently with the blue mobile app, right? And they may say, you know what, that's a good question. I would expect that they would be buying more online. Terrific. What else? I expect that they'd be coming to using the mobile app more frequently. Terrific, right? And what your boss is doing there is listing key results, outcomes, right there. And so as you start to develop, you can sneak in these Lean UX learning activities and say, boss, look, we've been testing some lightweight prototypes and some mock-ups of the blue mobile app, and it seems like it's really turning people off to the product. They're actually spending less time. And so we suggest making it red or pink or purple, or it doesn't matter, right? Whatever the feature is, because we've seen in our tests that that's actually going to drive the behaviors that you're looking for. And so what you're doing there is you're not saying no to your boss, right? And you're not doing the work because you don't like the idea. You're actually testing the idea, and then you're coming back with evidence that says, we think there's a better way. And that's the most you can do, right? That's not a guarantee that your boss is going to let you change course, right? But I think that's the most you can do, is to bring back that evidence again and again and again, and hope that you can change their minds based on that. Doesn't always work.
Exactly. So Lena actually have a question. I think it's a bit in line with what you've been talking about now, because she's asking, okay, if you want to work more in the future. So she says that the Canvas seem to be focusing on what customers want today. So if you want to have a more long-term strategic thinking, can you put some words onto how to use the Canvas there? And also if you have some tips and tricks on how to use the Canvas when you're dealing with trends or future needs that are not yet clear.
I mean, look, all of this. So look, the interesting thing about all of this is that it's designed to mitigate risk. And this is the thing that always, I think gets lost, right? Because we get married to buzzwords, catchphrases, good book titles, right? The Lean Startup, right? Things like that. Lean Startup, Agile, Scrum. Scrum is a terrible name, by the way, right? Right? All of this stuff is designed to mitigate risk. Right? That's what we're doing here. We're reducing the risk of building and designing and shipping products that people don't want and that don't solve real problems. The problem here is that mitigating that risk means that we will likely collect evidence that contradicts popular opinion at the company, historical momentum, or the hippo, right? The highest paid person's opinion. Mm-hmm. And so I think that if we can pitch this, look, if somebody says, I don't know what Lean UX is, I don't know what product discovery is, right? So look, it's risk mitigation, right? We have all these ideas about the future, about how we think we might expand or grow or evolve the product line, right? We can build these learning loops. They're cheap, they're lightweight, they're not expensive, and they can contribute evidence to our future thinking that can help focus our future thinking down paths that might be more successful. And so the pitch to your bosses here or to the organization is, I'm going to make you more likely to be right. Right? And I think that should speak to a few egos in the organization, and it should get people thinking about the future. Look, everybody wants to be Steve Jobs. Right? Everybody wants to be Elon Musk or Bezos, where they're like, I see the future and we're just going this way, right? I'm going to tell you something that's going to make you sad, okay? You're not Steve Jobs, right? And your boss isn't Steve Jobs, right? Your boss's boss isn't Steve Jobs or Elon Musk. Very few people, like there are design geniuses out there. They exist, obviously, right? Very few of us are those people. And more importantly, very few of us are in a position to risk our entire organization over our design genius ideas, right? Which is exactly what Jobs did and what Musk does and what Bezos did, right? Like they risked everything on their vision, right? And so if we're not design geniuses and we don't have the power to risk our entire organizations, right, then we have ways to reduce that risk. And these lightweight tools like Lean UX are exactly designed for that.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah.
Jacob is asking, our company is organized fairly siloed. So for instance, front end, back end, product design, and so on, in order to achieve strong integrity, I can't pronounce that, within each discipline. But how do you see Lean UX work in such an organizational setup?
It's difficult.
Yeah.
It's absolutely difficult because the goal of Lean UX is to cut across those silos, right? It's explicitly designed to break those silos. Now that doesn't mean, and look, and you've heard about matrixed organizations, right? So there's no reason why there can't be a front end team and a back end team and a UX team and a copywriting team and a marketing team, whatever, right? But our day-to-day work should be cross-functional. And Lean UX is going to struggle if it isn't, right? Because if it's not cross-functional, then one team is going to do this. Let's say it's the design team or the product team. They're going to discover some things, and then they're going to have to tell people. And as soon as you start to hand off your findings, you're back to the old ways of working. So the waterfall ways of working, because we don't have that shared understanding, right? And so I think it's worthy of an exploration inside your organization to say, well, look, I'd like to I'd love to have, like, when I was leading UX teams, I really loved having a UX team, right? Because, you know, we had our weekly meetings, we had our outings, we talked about UX stuff, we improved our tools, we learned from each other. But day to day, the designers on my team worked on their Scrum teams, they worked on their product teams, right? Because they needed to work with those folks and build that shared understanding. And so if we don't have that, Lean UX is going to struggle. Absolutely, because we end up right back into handoffs and waterfall and a lack of shared understanding.
Yeah. Inge is asking, definition of done, how low should the risk be before you can release MVP? Rule of thumb here.
Yeah, so again, so MVP is a fabulous tool that has been grossly misunderstood and bastardized across organizations all over the world, right? And this is one of the fun and sad exercises that we do when we used to teach live. Is we have a room full of folks and we'd say, what does MVP mean at your organization? Mm-hmm. Right? And then we'd write all the answers up on the board. And literally you get everything from like version 1, which is very popular, to the worst product we can get away with, right? Literally, you hear that from folks. Sometimes we hear it's the maximum viable product, it's the most we can ship in a certain time frame. What Eric Ries meant by MVP and the way that we use MVP is experiment, right? And if it's experiment, then your MVP could be a customer conversation. Your MVP could be a paper prototype. If MVP at your organization means version 1 of the product, when you're actually writing code, you need to de-risk that fairly significantly. So if you remember the truth curve I showed you there a few minutes ago, right? I would expect that if you're committing to writing code for something that is you've decided is particularly risky, I would hope that you've at least done some paper prototyping and talked to some customers initially to at least justify the writing of code. And if you're going to write that code, that you would write it so that it is lightweight, disposable, shipped to very few people, like an A/B test that's gone to like 1%, 0.5% of your population, because you should be comfortable throwing it away. Just to give you an example, like when we worked, I had an agency in New York a few years ago, a long time ago actually now, we would build products and we would build for clients, and we knew that the systems that we were building could scale to maybe 1,000 users. And after 1,000 users, we knew that the infrastructure would collapse, like it wouldn't support it. And And we did that explicitly because we didn't know if this thing was going to get over 1,000 users, and we wanted to get the feedback. And if it was going to break because we're hitting well over 1,000 users, that's a fantastic signal from the market. That's great evidence to say, look, we got to throw this away. We got to rebuild the infrastructure to actually scale it to 1 million. And so that's how I would answer that question.
Okay, then we have a question. What if user/business outcome crashes with your brand? I think that's a bit like, it's from the design, and I would actually recommend you who asked this question, actually look at the talk we had with Jamie Levy a couple of weeks ago as well, because we have this almost the same question there, but I would definitely like to hear your answer as well, Jeff.
I mean, look, if it's really interesting, right? So if it clashes with your brand, that's, you know, it's really interesting. Like the company that comes to mind, right, is Facebook, right? Like it feels like, right, that's that kind of, it's everyone's favorite company to pick on these days, and rightfully so. Let's be clear, they deserve it. They deserve it all. But that's really interesting. Like if you're optimizing for behavior that negatively reflects on your brand, something is broken, right? Something is like, I'll give you, I actually have a good example for this. It's an old example, but I used to work at, I told you, at a company called The Ladders. Now, The Ladders was a job board that catered to people who made $100,000 or more. And it was a subscription service. And I worked on the product team, and we had a marketing team. It was an email marketing, direct marketing team. Every time the subscription numbers, the top of the funnel, would start to dip a little bit, the marketing team would just turn up the email machine. They would just crank out emails and emails and emails, like really just spam, right? And it would murder the brand. Like people, literally, when I got the job at The Ladders, I remember I went to a party with some friends and I said, I got a new job. And they're like, oh, where do you work? I said, I'm the director of UX at The Ladders. And one guy looks at me and he goes, oh, the email people.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Not the job board, not the executive search board, the email people, right? And what was happening there was the more we turned up the email marketing, we drove top of the funnel acquisition, absolutely, right? And we killed retention. People are like, I don't need all these emails, I'm out of here, right? And so something was broken there, right? And we had to have a very serious conversation about how to balance acquisition and retention in a way that actually reflected the positive aspects of the brand. And so we became the job board for executives, not the email people, right? And so that something is broken in there, and there needs to be a conversation. I don't have a brilliant answer without context, but I think Facebook's a really good example of this, right? Their business model clearly doesn't optimize for the benefit of the user. And yet their brand is, we bring people together and we bring, keep people in touch and blah, 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 right? So that's what I got on that. I don't know if it's good. That's what I got.
Okay. But I think it's a very interesting question, right? So yeah, and quite relevant in some organizations and in some part of the world as well. So Jeppe is asking, did you ever have a case where testing a hypothesis required a rather high fidelity, complex implementation to get valid useful results?
Yes. I mean, look, inevitably, there are going to be situations where the kind of experimentation you do is going to reflect the industry that you're working in, right? One thing that comes to mind is, and I did some work with a company, an industrial manufacturing company. It's actually where the inspiration for that Lean UX Canvas example came from. And they build things like air conditioning units for skyscrapers.
Okay. So
like giant metal boxes the size of a room that sit on top of a building. How are you going to test that? Right? Like, it's a fair question, right? And I've done some work before with GE Locomotive. They build trains, right? How are you going to test that? Really good questions, right? So as you think about it, right, what you have to do is you're going to have a hypothesis, right? The hypothesis, and generally speaking, when you first start to write hypotheses, they're going to be big. So you say something like, we believe we should build an energy efficient green air conditioning unit that has all these features for the owners and managers of buildings that are more than 20 stories tall, right? Blah, 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 that kind of hypothesis. Cool, great. Before we start to prototype that air conditioning unit, right? What are the risks? So we go to box number 7. What are the important things that we need to learn about this hypothesis? And in talking to these folks at this company, when I did this work with them, they said, well, one of the risks is building green and efficient, environmentally friendly air conditioning units is expensive. Right. And we're assuming, this kind of comes back to the previous question a little bit, but we're assuming that our customers want those features. Like they will buy more stuff from us if it's environmentally friendly, it's green, it's efficient, that type of thing. But we don't actually know that. Right. I said, great. How could you test that? Right? Before we build anything, how do we test that? And they'll say, well, we could go talk to our customers. Genius. You did it. Good work, right? And so they went and they did some surveys, right? And they came back and they said, yes, they want this. Okay, great. Now, what does that mean for the design of the giant metal box that sits on top of a skyscraper? Well, it means we need to do this and do that. Great. How can we validate the design of this thing without actually building it? Like, well, we've got some cardboard boxes over in the storage room. We can cut those up and tape them together and make a kind of a life-size cardboard prototype of this thing, right? And so you see what I'm doing there? Like, ultimately, they will need to build a prototype of the air conditioning unit, right? It's inevitable. They're going to need it. But there are lots of steps before we get there to A, justify that level of effort, and B, to give them enough evidence to make that the most realistic prototype that they can come up with. Right. And so the short answer to your question is yes. And there are lots and lots of steps before that you can use to make that high fidelity experiment the most successful it can be.
Yeah. So questions are ticking in, but I think we'll have the last one now. So Sylvester is asking, when filling in the Lean UX canvas in your cross-functional team, do you recommend doing it in one session or multiple sessions?
It depends on the scope of the problem statement that you're taking on. So if you're taking on a problem statement where the scope is a feature, right? So maybe or you're solving for a particular slice of the customer journey, I think you can do it in one session, maybe a half day, maybe a day, depending on how good you are at it. If the scope is a lot larger, we've built this, music streaming service, and we've noticed that people aren't using it anymore and they're defecting to competing services. You might want to break that up over the course of a couple of days because the conversations will be bigger, the discussions will be bigger, and they'll take more time. So you might want to break it up over like 2 days or 3 days.
Okay, great. But I think time is almost up. So I think I'll say it's thank you for a very, very inspirational talk, Jeff. I think, and I can see a lot of people have also written that in the chat as well. So they have been very thrilled with what you're presenting, and they are very much keen on going out and actually try to start implementing some of the stuff in their own organizations as well. So that's awesome. And again, you guys behind the screen, if you have any questions and so on, I'm definitely sure that you had the opportunity of sending them to Jeff. And if you want to reach out to us at Preely as well, just send us a mail or find us on LinkedIn, and then we'll see what we can do. So I also want to say that if you have any ideas or suggestions on how we can improve these UX meetups, let us know. And if you have an idea of who you would like to hear speak next, shoot us a mail, and then we'll see what we can do. And then, of course, also keep an eye on your inbox, where you will receive a recording of the whole session. And then, of course, also link to the different things Jeff has mentioned, the courses and the books and so on. So I think that was all from now. I think it has been an awesome session. So thank you so much, Jeff.
My pleasure. Thanks so much for having me. This was a ton of fun, really great questions. And I look forward to seeing you all in the real world, hopefully someday.
Yeah, hopefully. And definitely come visit in Copenhagen at some point.
Done.
Awesome. But have a great day, everyone.
Bye, folks.
Bye-bye.